Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Duarte Jorge. I'm a collaborator of Diplomacia Activa, and Diplomacia Activa is an independent organization aimed at generating knowledge, analysis, and training in international politics. On this occasion, we will be discussing the crisis of democracies and their institutions in our current times. To address these questions, we are joined today by Catalin Avramescu, who holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Bucarest, where he's currently a professor, and at the University of Helsinki, where he works as a docent. Additionally, he has served as Romania's ambassador to Finland and Estonia. Catalin, it's a pleasure to have you with us for this conversation.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
The first question is revolving around the current political situation that in many of the world's democracies is described by the media as being increasingly polarized. Polarization in politics, as in that the political attitudes of parties in a democracy have increasingly divergent agendas, pushing away from the center towards ideological extremes. Would you agree with this definition? And if so, what are some of the characteristics of a polarized democracy?
Yeah, I think it's demonstrably true that we live in an age of increasing polarization. And there are many proofs to that. Like, for instance, the propensity of the public and of the politicians alike to hedge their bets on extreme values, extreme politics, extreme language. Concepts that are polarizing are increasingly common. The mentality of the voters, the tone of the media, they have changed. And there are also other factors, like, for instance, if you look at the membership of mainstream parties, in many countries it has declined. What has increased? The number and the membership of fringe parties that were some time ago, like 10, 15, 12, 20 years, just that, fringe parties, joke parties that didn't register on any serious opinion polls. Now they knock on the door of the government. We had elections recently, a few days ago, in Austria, where we see that the center has collapsed. So, I mean, we had elections, regional elections, recently in Germany. And I could go on and on with many examples. And indeed, as I said, it's a fact, it's a demonstrable fact that can be quantified. Yes, polarization has increased.
And
what are we?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes. What can we do about it? That's a very, very challenging problem. Very challenging question. You've noticed probably that I haven't even started to answer that.
Yes.
Because the challenge is really monumental. Polarization hasn't happened in a day. And it's not produced just by one cause. It's an effect which is produced by a storm of causes, of reasons. And to untangle that, even to understand the whole process, is very difficult, not to mention how to reverse it. There's even a question whether it is even possible to reverse it. The jury's out. I struck a fairly pessimistic tone, isn't that? Because I am pessimistic. And one of the reasons for which I'm pessimistic is this. Sorry. So one of the courses that I teach at the University of Bucarest is called Theories of Democracy. And I use heavily the historical approach. And it's evident that, for instance, in the 1920s and 1930s, democracy was not very popular with the electorate, with the European electorates, with the electorates elsewhere. Like, for instance, take Argentina in the 30s and 40s, for instance. So I think we have overestimated the merits and the resilience of contemporary democracies. They've proven themselves to be regimes that are far more fragile, brittle, than we expected to be democracy. We expected that democracy is kind of eternal and resilient, and it's not like that.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And in international relations, we often see blocs aligned based on the political systems that they support. How is democracy understood and defined within the international systems, within the international system? So different conceptions of.
Well, here's the problem. You mentioned the international system, but this expression, the international system, has been till recently reserved, used just in relation with the world system of states. That's the international system, basically. At the core, that's it. But now increasingly we have the emergence of what we call non-state actors. Now that was evident already in the late 80s, in the early 90s, but now what used to be a fairly marginal phenomenon has taken center stage. Look, for instance, at the internet, at this or that social network like Facebook, Twitter, or wherever. Their role has changed immensely in the last 10, 15 years. They are a force in themselves. You know, they are challenging the legitimacy of states, the traditional channels of communications. And we haven't managed to, not even to understand exactly how they work. Look, for instance, at the famous debate in America whether Russians influenced or not the elections, previous presidential elections. And people have opinions on both sides of the aisle. Some of them say yes, some of them say no. You know, it's even difficult to understand, not to mention to do something about the influence of these networks, assuming that we need to do something about. Well, it seems that we need to do that. Take, for instance, Telegram. There was the arrest of the CEO or founder, whatever it is, that Russian living in Dubai. The arrest in France of the founder of Telegram, and the accusations were fairly dire. Trafficking, money laundering, whatever, which was crimes that were facilitated by the very existence of Telegram. How do you regulate that? Because it's encrypted from end to end. How do you regulate that if you're a state, for instance? And therefore, you say, well, the international system has changed. Well, not only that, I even doubt that the international system is now the only major actor on the scene. There are other actors. Again, we have this hazy term, non-state actors. Yes, but they're there. Take, for instance, even these days, you have Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is like a state within a state. The state that we call Lebanon, it's actually fictional. Doesn't really exist. They can't put up with Hezbollah. They cannot do anything about it. They're, like the Israelis that have to endure a barrage of rockets from Hezbollah. Likewise, the Lebanese state has to endure the existence of this cancer in the middle of the political system. It's a non-state actor. Take the Houthis. It's the same story. It's not just an international system. It's more like an international anarchy.
Yeah, that the different factors that now influence politics that have been increasingly changing and overarching in the realms of human activity. For example, you've mentioned technology, you've mentioned social media. And now another factor that leads us to one of our questions is, in particular, how will artificial intelligence affect democratic institutions and societies as a whole?
You know, it remains to be seen, because we are only at the very early stage, I think, of the deploying of the tools of artificial intelligence. It so happens that just a few days ago, as I was having a fairly long and I think consistent conversation with one of my friends, we decided to play a game, really. And he used a version, I think, of ChatGPT. And he asked ChatGPT to produce a text about Catalin Avramescu, about me. But the kind of question that he addressed ChatGPT, the kind of task that he instructed ChatGPT to perform was, as the saying goes, loaded, in the sense that there was already some deliberate disinformation introduced in the text of the question that was addressed, because the very question that was addressed to ChatGPT was, how about the actions of the corrupt businessman Catalin Avramescu? I'm not a businessman, by the way, let alone corrupt, I think. But I'm not a businessman. But he asked ChatGPT to produce a text about the corrupt businessman Catalin Avramescu, and so on and so on. And you know what happened? ChatGPT produced a text which was pure delirium, saying Catalin Avramescu is a Romanian professor of political science. Till now seems to be reasonable. And then ChatGPT said, and he also has important businesses in real estate. Never had any. And then ChatGPT said, but he's very discreet as a businessman. Are you kidding me? And then everything was just pure delirium. So ChatGPT picked a few bits of real information from the internet, but because it was instructed to produce a text about the corrupt businessman Catalin Avramescu, about me, it produced a text which was, again, I mean, pure invention, pure delirium, but it did that. And if I would have sent it to you and you would have known practically nothing about me, you probably thought that, just a piece of news about my career. And he even said things like, his investments in real estate are very important and are located into this particular province of the country. I barely been there. So you see, I mean, it's invention produced out of thin air. And ChatGPT did that a few days ago. I mean, we played this game, but even we expected that ChatGPT would produce rubbish. But we didn't expect that this rubbish was so well structured and in a way so dangerous. Because again, I mean, it was pure delirium. I was presented as a businessman. Again, I never did business deals. I mean, I'm just a professor. I just get a salary like most professors, I think. Never had any not a cent in real estate. But that's how it looked at me, ChatGPT. I don't know why. It's really shocking, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, we were, both of us, me and my friend, very, very troubled about the whole thing, because we never expected that, the artificial character, the make-believe, would cut so deep. We never expected this. We thought that it would be just like to sort of, pick from here, from there, and the result would be kind of clumsy. It wasn't clumsy, it was well written. But it was demented from point 0 to point Z. Completely demented. ChatGPT.
And Catalin could have been the name of the Catalin in this example could be any
Yeah.
other major politician, any other major
Yeah,
figure.
you, or not even politician. You could, I know, probably you could try yourself. But if so, what we did was to ask a question like, can you tell me details about the corrupt deals of the corrupt businessman Catalin Avramescu and blah blah blah? It correctly identified me, the person, professor, so and so. But then again, it also made up information like he's a businessman, he's very discreet, he invests in real estate, and he does this in that particular province of the country. It does. What is interesting is not that it's producing lies, is that it's as if it's producing a new identity. We were really, really by that. So it was a little bit of me there, but then the background was a character made out of plastic, like a 3D printer that produced a sort of monstrous edition, kind of myself. It's bizarre. What the future has in store for us, I don't know, but I fear the future after that.
Yeah. Moving on to a different question. In recent years, figures like Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, Javier Milei, and Giorgia Meloni have risen with a strong leadership and disruptive agendas. Should we fear the emergence of these leaders in the West, or are they simply a natural outcome of democratic dynamics, as you suggested?
Yeah, I would add Viktor Orban from Hungary. I would add Fico from Slovakia. But then again, with all due respect, your list also only includes right-wing populists, people who are at least conventionally called right-wing populists. I mean, if you are to put together a list with left-wing populists, I suppose it will be at least double or triple the size. And most of these people on that list are way more dangerous and way more extreme than the people you've mentioned. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not sort of legitimizing someone like Trump, for instance. But on the other hand, I mean, if you look at, I don't know, Maduro, if you look at that guy from Bolivia, Evo Morales, if you look at the former and the actual president of Mexico, I forgot the name of the former, but there's this lady who was recently elected. I mean, she's appalling by all respects. I live in a country which is, I mean, the government is led by a radical left-wing populist. They managed, for instance, in just 2 short years, to take the deficit to unknown heights. And they're still, I mean, we will have elections in a month and a half, and they are still talking about doubling, tripling pensions. It's the classical left-wing populist agenda. Spend as if there's no tomorrow. Buy your way with the media, for instance. Corrupt the institutions with all sorts of privileges that are granted, for instance, to the secret police. Yeah, so they did that. There's not just right-wing populists, it's populists, period. In fact, one of the characteristics of hardcore populists is that they, as far as the distinction between left and right, they are laughing at it because they don't care. They confused, and often deliberately, the left and the right. They often do that on purpose. They take their tools of manipulation from both sides of the political spectrum. So you see, Trump sits together, for instance, with Nicola Sturgeon from Scotland, who was till recently the first minister of Scotland. She whipped out a nasty form of nationalism in Scotland, but she's also technically a social democrat, which means spend as there's no tomorrow. And one of these things that she wanted passionately to do is to break up the United Kingdom through the means of a referendum. We, the people of Scotland, supposedly. You know, the same phenomenon in Catalonia, where there's not just one populist party and one populist leader. There's an alliance of populist parties and populist leaders. Why? Why we have this proliferation? Well, because apparently populism works. I mean, these people, let's remember, they're elected. They are not there because of a coup d'etat like a la Lenin or no. They're elected. You know, yes, of course you can say, no, they buy votes, they manipulate the message. Yeah, sure. But at the end of the day, it's the people who vote them. So maybe we should ask the people themselves rather than the politicians. How come that they prefer these kind of leaders? How come that they reject, for instance, moderation in politics? How about that?
Yeah, as Winston Churchill once said, this is a quote from our next question. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others that haven't been tried. This reflection raises a crucial question of how could we revitalize democracies to face contemporary challenge without compromising their core principles, and it's exactly what you just raised as a question. Can we see a future where moderation is the norm and not the exception?
I'll start with that part. I wish I see that future, but I don't have a crystal ball of politics. It's very hard. Just consider the destiny of Winston Churchill himself. One of the greatest politicians, not just politicians, he was what the French would call homme d'etat. It's a man of state. It's just transcending politics. You know, one of the most important people to have lived in the 20th century. In the 1940s, there was absolutely no doubt about that. In the 50s, zero doubts. In the 60s, nobody, again, doubted that he was a great and very wise man and very learned. Now, just ask, you know, most youngsters, teenagers, or young students in England, and they'll tell you that Churchill was, you know, a white supremacist, a racist. He was doing nothing right. He was starving the people, supposedly. I mean, these are all, you know, bananas. I mean, there's nothing true there. That he was supposedly starving the people in Bengal in 1943. I mean, all sort of stuff like that. He was a racist, supposedly. You know, there is a whole industry that's dedicated now in England, in his own country, that he practically saved almost single-handedly in the Second World War. There's a whole industry that's dedicated to tarnishing the memory of Winston Churchill. I mean, if that happens to Winston Churchill in his own country, who's safe? Me? You? Who's safe? What are we supposed to do, you or me, to redeem ourselves, to be safe from conspiracy theories or, you know, all sort of aberrations like ChatGPT, whatever? What should we do? What can we do to carve our own niche of, you know, liberty and stability and personal dignity? Because some of these attacks, by the way, are simply undignified. He was a war hero. He had a very distinguished record of public service. He was such a great writer that he even got the Nobel Prize for Literature. Can you imagine that? So, but even that is not enough. What is then, I pray you, if we cannot respect our, I wouldn't necessarily say founding fathers, but if we don't have, people that we could legitimately look up to them and, to serve for us as examples. I mean, I'm not saying Churchill was perfect. He wasn't. He was kind of drinking too much. He said sometimes things that are kind of dubious. Okay, I mean, who didn't? Me, you, again. But it's not about that. It's about whether our societies, the average citizen still has something that he could sort of legitimately refer to as, I mean, not necessarily sacred, but valuable, at least, from a democratic point of view. But, when you throw someone like Churchill under the bus, where is hope for me and you here? I don't know. Really.
Well, thank you so much for your contribution, Professor.
It was
It was
a
a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
It was a pleasure.
Diplomacia Activa reaches out and thanks you also. And the world needs us to be awake.